Welcome, everybody, to a very special designer-assisted unboxing. Today, our game in question is the brand new By Swords and Bayonets from GMT Games, and its designer, Alan Dickerson, a.k.a. STIGLR, is with us. Alan, thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, I'm glad to be here.
Much appreciated. And I know it's been a long time coming for you, and it's been a long time coming for the folks who have been waiting for By Swords and Bayonets here as well. So we are going to get to unbox it today, and I'll finally get to see what's inside.
Great.
Now, you had mentioned that you had actually started working on this while Richard Berg, the series originator, was still alive.
Yes. In fact, I started it. Well, actually, he may have passed I think in the summer, and I believe I started it in the fall of that year, 2019.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Okay.
But it was within the same year.
Okay.
That both of those events happened.
And I know we've talked about this before, but for the benefit of the folks watching, what motivated the design of By Swords and Bayonets? Because there's, a lot of other games in the series, some of which are visible behind me here.
Right.
I'm not sure if you can actually see that or not.
You'll get the full story actually in the designer's notes, but I guess I can, kind of tip the hand by saying that it started as just kind of a experiment in production and design. I was learning a lot about how to draw maps and make counters, and thinking of designing my own game for a completely different campaign. And while I was doing that, just one day I kind of happened upon information about the Battle of Second Rappahannock Station, and just as kind of an experiment, I started doing a little bit of research, and I was really lucky, and I found that everything was either in the original records or easily accessible on the internet. I was able to get an almost complete order of battle and everything like that, and I thought, oh wow, this came together really easily, unlike some other battles. And after I did that, I thought, wow, this would make a great, little battle for a magazine like C3I or Against the Odds. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to talk to Dick Whitaker about it. And I talked to him, and he in turn introduced me to Tony Curtis at GMT. And, I pitched him the idea. And as it happens, Tony had a completely different idea, and he was the one who came up with the idea of a starter kit, as it were, for the series with 4 small battles, kind of bringing back the old SPI quad concept. And that was the beginning of it. So it started with Second Rappahannock Station. Then I got roped in to do the other 3 battles, and the rest is history.
Okay. Well, I think I expect to be pleased by the content. So without further ado, let's take a look. So we do have this label on the box, which I haven't seen from GMT before. This might be related to their new import situation. But otherwise, we're in a completely standard GMT box. And this is a sticker on top of the shrink wrap. So
yep.
Back of the box is very handsome. Developer Bill Byrne, and research and design by Bill Byrne and yourself. Complexity 7. It's a fairly complicated game system, but I think by minimizing the number of variables that the player actually has to manage, I think this will end up being an excellent introduction to GBACW. And solitaire suitability is, of course, pretty high, as STIGLR can attest, because he loves solitaire games, right?
Well, I know I played at least all of the 4 battles, after I designed them. Solitaire is kind of a shakeout cruise kind of situation to make sure that they worked before I put them into play testing. So yes, I do play solitaire, but usually not for gaming. Not for gaming, for other reasons. Either as a study of a battle, I might do it, or if you're involved in design, well, you have to do a certain amount of it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. My attitude towards solitaire play is very similar, actually. Well, let's get her open and take a look and see what we have here.
That is a nasty looking knife there.
Very excited. This is not my nastiest looking knife.
Oh, wow. Okay. There are worse ones.
Well, this is the one that I could easily flip open. So that's why I unbox with it. All right. So we've got 2 appropriately colored D10s. This is D10 system. And I like that. I think that's Kai, who is responsible for the dice in the boxes now. And she's doing a fabulous job giving us thematically appropriate dice.
She really is.
So we're going to have a number of booklets here. And in general, the box is quite full. So I see 3 booklets. There's the series rulebook, which I see no particularly pressing reason for us to go through. But as it's a 7 out of 9 on GMT's complexity scale, 44 pages, matte finish, full color. This is the same edition of the series rules that appeared in Into the Woods. Am I right?
No, this is the 2024 version. I think Into the Woods was 2022, 21, or something like that.
Was it that long ago? I'm old. What can you say?
Yeah. They're getting updated like every 2 to 3 years now, with just small bits of tidying up, but not a lot has changed. And I think what has changed is notated in blue in there so that you can find it. And there's also, you'll find like little minier balls in the margins there for any sections that are completely new.
Okay. And have we added any? Well, actually, let me ask this, and you may not know the answer. Will this edition of the series rulebook be the version that appears in the new version of 3 Days of Gettysburg?
Good question. It may and it may not. But I will add, though, that when 3 Days of Gettysburg Deluxe comes out, it will have an additional rule book in it, the long-awaited simple rules, which are a trimmed down version of the rule set, which I know Dick Whitaker is very, very excited about. Me a little bit less so, because my feeling is that people who want to approach the system should learn this system and not anything else. But I don't make the decisions for the system. So anyway, the simple rule book will come out along with the series rulebook, the regular series rulebook, in Three Dog Deluxe.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm curious to see simple GBOH, or GBACW, but I expect to continue to play with the full rules personally.
Yeah.
That's just me. All right. So we've got a battle book, which is about 32 pages. It is indeed 32 pages. Same paper stock, also full color. Looks like, actually, let's take a look at this. So this looks like not a ton of game or battle specific rules here. I'm only seeing about 2.5 pages, which is great.
Well, the first set of rules are those that differ from the series rules and that apply to all 4 battles.
Okay.
Then after that, each of the 4 battles has its own set of special or additional rules.
Okay. And as we could see, we're getting into Big Bethel here, which is an early Civil War battle, of course, 1861.
Yep. By some accounts, it was the first pitched battle in the war.
And here we have Mill Springs, and this is 1862. I know nothing about this battle at all.
Right.
So I am looking forward to learning about this battle by playing it out in GBACW.
Yep. That was also one of the goals of this, is to have 4 battles that people may or may not know a lot about. Certainly everybody knows Gettysburg from start to finish, and several other battles. And all of these, I found out that I think all but one of them have been gamed by other designers and publishers, but in smaller releases.
Mm-hmm. Well, it'd be no sense. I mean, to me, there'd be no sense in playing out Big Bethel with like 1,000 counters. That would feel really weird, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Here's New Bern, which is also 1862. And I'm seeing some game-specific rules for things like rain and Mill Spring, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Are there multiple scenarios for the individual battles?
Only for Second Rappahannock Station.
Okay.
Second Rappahannock Station has actually the historical battle is really, really short, because the battle historically was basically launched at dusk and continued, about 1 hour into the night, and it was all over.
Mm.
But the version of the battle that I designed kind of starts earlier in the afternoon, and the Union have their choice whether to kind of make a meal out of the setup for the attack on the hillside bulwark. So I always wondered why they took so much time to develop the battle and then waited to risk a night attack, which those are kind of dicey.
Who was the Union commander at this battle?
Oh boy, let's see here. It was the name is escaping me right now. Hang on, let me look at the battle book. But I know it was the 6th Corps. Yep, here we go. It was Russell.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
All right.
Well,
and is Jubal Early in command of the Confederates?
Yes. And actually, Robert E. Lee was on the field, but for some strange reason, took no part and had no effect on the battle other than to stand behind the Rappahannock River and kind of watch everything, through a glass. So yeah, that was an odd one.
Too. That does feel a little strange, but he was a busy man too.
Yes.
So we got 2 pages of designer's notes, which will be, of course, the first thing I read here. I find these extremely, in general, I find designer's notes to be very illuminating in terms of what is the designer trying to get at with the design, and I look forward to reading yours. And then we've got some scans of the counter sheets, which will be very useful. Map art, Charlie Kibler. Okay.
Yep.
I had a hunch, actually.
Yeah, he does all of the maps for this series now, and it's funny. During production, we use scans of previously used art to build our playtest maps, and so everything, even from the early going, looks pretty good and pretty much like what will go in the box. But what always happens is we submit the project to GMT. Charlie gets a hold of it, and somehow he opens his magic box of pixie dust and just sprays a whole bunch of Marvelous on it. And then it comes back, and you're looking at it, and you're like, what did he do? This just pops like 50% more than what you sent in. It's just amazing.
I fully agree. Charlie is one of my favorite wargaming map artists or cartographers.
Yeah. He also is behind the GCA.
Indeed, he is. GCA is maybe great campaigns.
Exactly. And those are even gorgeous. More well regarded, by the cognoscenti. So
I have a spare set of Stonewall Jackson's Way 2 maps that are eventually going in a frame on the wall right here, in fact.
Yeah.
So this is new. This is a collected examples of play booklet.
Yes.
And it feels like about 32 pages. Indeed,
it's 32 as well.
Okay. So
yeah, I kind of volunteered almost as an afterthought because, developing the battle, we were using Vassal modules, and, we had the nearly camera ready art and everything like that. So I thought, you know what, I could get some screen grabs of an actual game and actually show the players, how things could go, and also, get in some tips and tricks as to, why you might do this instead of doing that, or what might be the risk of this strategy, and throw it all in there and just go soup to nuts through 3 turns of Big Bethel.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the challenges that people face when they read the rules are that the game is very, very interlaced.
Mm-hmm.
So, movement, shock combat, fire combat, command, morale and cohesion, all of those things are kind of interlaced, but the rules have to treat them kind of section by section
Mm-hmm.
for organization, but it makes it a little bit harder to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, struggle with that. And it's even hard sometimes to describe things, because while you're describing something to a new person, you'll quickly realize, oh, but wait, well, there are exceptions to that when this happens, and then you have to go down this rabbit hole and then kind of come back and everything like that. And meanwhile, somebody's head is spinning.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a way of, showing how the game flows from start to finish through 3 turns. And you get varying levels of detail. So when we start out, it's like we're showing them everything. We're counting the movement points. We're showing the direction they go and everything like that. And for the fire routines, we describe the whole process. Well, you got 5 strength points of rifles firing at this unit at a range of 2. And so the basic die roll modifier is this. And then these specifics apply to add or subtract more die roll modifiers. And then you roll the die, and let's say you rolled a 6. Okay, and let's say your final die roll modifier is -2. Okay, so 6 minus 2 is 4. And if you look on this table, in this column, you'll see that a 4 equals this result.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, somebody has to roll to see if they disorder. So then they roll, and the roll is this. So anyway, you just go all the way through it. And after a while, once you do that several times for a couple of turns, then it all starts to click and it all starts to make sense. And then after you've learned all those basics, it's not nearly as crunchy as it seems to be when you start off.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a really great idea to just kind of provide a separate booklet with a walkthrough and a bunch of additional examples. Fabulous idea. Now, I think we have 2 half-sized, double-sided maps here. So,
right,
for example,
2 maps for 4 battles.
Mm-hmm. Here is Mill Springs. Hopefully, we can see this relatively clearly. And of course, the maps look fantastic. So this is the entire map for Mill Springs.
Yep.
And, you could play this entire thing easily on a folding table or card table or something like that. Here's Big Bethel, similar size.
Mm-hmm.
Do the illustrations, are those intended as a holding box of some kind?
No.
This area? Or they're just decorative?
Yep, they're just decorative.
I can live with that.
But I think they are on 3 of them. I think one of them does not have one of those on it. There you go.
Speaking of which, New Bern, in fact, does not.
Right.
See, we had a heavily, I don't know anything about this battle either, to be honest. Lot of woods over here.
Yes, it's almost entirely wooded. And that really, really complicates the Union, who have an abundance of men, but trying to keep them all together and keep them in command with the woods there, it's a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Here's Second Rappahannock Station.
Right.
With, of course, the Rappahannock River here.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it looks like on this one, we have a fortified Confederate line. Am I right?
Yes, that is the Fort Thompson line, with Fort Thompson there right up against the Neuse River.
Mm-hmm.
And the Confederates are defending that against a Union advance that is going south to north, which from this vantage point is from left to right.
Right to left.
And now is right to left. So they're going north. And the Confederates are trying to defend that 1.25 mile line with not nearly enough men to adequately defend it. And the Union are in that large wooded area just to the south of it, and they've got a ton of men, but it's not really easy, especially with that abattis right in front of the line.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's a very, very interesting battle, and it hinges on not only the usual trying to render the enemy combat ineffective, but also the Union wants to take the fort, and with it, the fortified line. The Confederates have they're motivated to hold it as long as they can, and then after the jig is up and resistance is futile, then they can choose to, or they may be forced to, abandon that line. And then after that, then they will score victory points for units that they can successfully get off of the north edge of the map. So it's really interesting watching, that process happen, where you go from strongly defending the line to being forced to give it up, and then you're trying to get off the map, and depending on how well the Union are able to crack the line, they might be able to trap some of the Confederate forces and keep them from retreating north.
Mm-hmm. Now we've got some player aid cards here as well. And these are both double-sided on the typical GMT sort of set and finish stock. So on the front of, here's your new burns for the Union and Confederates, and here you will see our turn record tracks and places to put the efficiency markers and victory points and that. And then on the backs, we've got Second Rappahannock.
Right.
And the other pair of cards are the same thing. Mill Springs on the back, Big Bethel on the front.
Right.
So in terms of turn length, these are also pretty tidy small battles too, right?
Yes, 6 or 7 turns, I think. One is 7 turns.
Mm-hmm.
The rest are 6 or fewer.
Mm-hmm.
Again, trying to avoid giving the new player too much to do or for too long. Mm-hmm. So these are actually playable and finishable in a long afternoon.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you find that you had to make any modifications to the command, or maybe modifications is the wrong word. In what way did you find that you had to use the command system for these smaller battles than we've typically seen, right? Because
yes.
Ordinarily, the chits are by brigade, right?
Yes. That's a very good question. I really wanted to make sure that the game supported the series rules as much as possible. Mm-hmm. However, because the battles are so small and the largest possible formation for either side on the map is a undersized division, it was necessary to alter the series rules a little bit, because if you learn the command rules, you will find that everything is really built around the corps commander. Mm-hmm. And the corps commander starts the chain that goes down to division, and then after that down to brigade, and after that down to the regiments and batteries. Mm-hmm. And the system encourages you or penalizes you if you don't for keeping that chain unbroken all the way down. And from the point at which it's broken, usually by one commander not being within command range of the next commander lower, once that chain breaks, then deleterious things happen. You start to lose potential activations and other ill effects. Now, we're not able to support that in any of these battles because there isn't a core commander in the entire box. So that was the birth point of Special Rule 5.32, if my memory serves me, that fixes that for the purposes of this game, so that you're not docked efficiency because you can't trace to the core commander. And that situation is possible in the other larger games where, say, your core commander doesn't start the game on the map. So it's like, okay, he's there, he's just not there yet. So you would be docked in that situation. But here, it's just not possible because they weren't on the field. So the rules were changed a little bit there. And also, we had to build in a special rule about picking the activation markers, because usually there is one formation per side. And so there is a greater chance that, say, I could start a turn with initiative for the Union and then draw all of the Union's chits out of the cup before the first Confederate chit is drawn out.
I would,
because maybe there's only 8 total in the cup to begin with, right? And so we had to set up a rule where if one player gets 2 consecutive, the next one has to be for the other side, unless the other side just doesn't have any more in the cup.
Okay. I think that's a reasonable rule. I do recall playing Three Dog by the time we got into the second day, July 2nd. I think there were probably close to 60 chits in that cup. It was absolutely insane.
Yeah, and they're the
per
problem.
Turn.
Yes, exactly, per turn. And there you don't run into that problem, because even if you run through like a string of 12 consecutive Union activations drawn, it's going to be split up between 4, 5, 6 different divisions on different parts of the map, so you don't get that distortion to the action.
And having played Dead of Winter twice now, and Three Dog, I mean, and all of those are big games, right?
Yes.
I found that it balanced itself naturally in the big games, even though even if you drew 6 or 7 Union or Confederate or whatever chits in a row, because they'd be all over the place.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
In Stones River, especially, all over the place.
Exactly.
So, and I'm guaranteed, of course, to pull the one that I don't need to move immediately. But that's just me.
Yep.
Now we've got
Murphy's Law.
Gary's Law, as we call it in my house. We've got some of the player aids here. We've got the big 2-sided player aids, which are identical, and there's 2 of these. And on the inside, we've got the basically the range effects table, the fire table, the modifications for that stuff. And then on the outside, we have some miscellaneous tables and then stuff for shock on the back. And then on the other player aid, we have the terrain effects chart, which is, there's not a lot of arcane terrain types here in this particular game. I think intentionally, I imagine. And of course, the second disorder table, which I believe I have memorized after the Stones River game last year.
And the second disorder tables are identical on the backs of all 4 of the terrain effects cards for each battle.
Okay. I kind of like that that there's 4 of these too, because that way, I mean, just just in case you play this as a team game, right? That way, each of the 4 players can have their own copy of this at least.
Yeah, they could.
And
Yeah, that's true.
they're different. You kind of want what I'll tend to do usually is to stick one of each under the plexi, and then in this case, that gives us a couple extra copies to pass around the table as needed, which I also like.
Yep.
So now we've got some counters here as well, and I will point out that there is a GMT counter tray in the box. Did you have anything to do with this?
No. They spec'd everything out, and they just priced it with that in it without me even having to ask for it. So I thought, oh, wonderful.
It's always nice to get a counter tray.
Yes, indeed.
So 2 shiny GMT counter sheets on the nice thick brown core stuff. This is, of course, markers. And what do we got here? Some errata counters for...
Yeah. There's one for Into the Woods and one for Death Valley. Actually, 2 for Into the Woods. There was a abandoned artillery counter that had gotten misprinted.
Okay. That's this guy right here then.
Yep.
Okay. That's really not a ton of errata counters for that, in my opinion. And of course,
it's not.
All of our units are over here. So this is for 4 battles. You can see that there's not an enormous quantity of units. What is, I don't need an exact number here, but what's the total piece count on the maps for these battles in general? It's probably, I would guess, 25 counters per side or something like that.
We wanted it to be fewer than 50 combat counters per side per game. New Bern with the Union Horde, you can see that on the right side in the middle there with the purple banner, just dominates that. But that even is ameliorated by the fact that the regiments are large enough that each regiment has at least an A and a B breakdown unit, if not a C breakdown unit. So, even those aren't as many as they seem unless, you keep everything broken down, which you pretty much have to do just to keep them in command in the wood.
So right here, for example, we've got the 25th Massachusetts, which has 3 components of its division. So you can either walk around with 16, which is probably not the best idea, or 3 individual 6s. So there is some duplication here and some ability to swap in smaller breakdown units of the individual regiments.
Right.
And there's also not an insane quantity of activation markers in the entire game. There's only about 25, 26 activation markers in the whole thing.
Yep. So. And also, you will notice, the people who are familiar with the series will notice that the graphics for the infantry and the cavalry have been updated a little bit. And they were brushed up by, let's see if I can say his name without completely destroying it, Darius Burashevsky.
Okay.
And he kind of updated a set of illustrations that had been stable for maybe 15 years or something like that. So I think these are the first ones. This is the first game that these appeared in, although they may have appeared earlier in the Death Valley expansion. I'm not exactly sure.
But well, they all look fantastic, and I'm going to lovingly clip each and every corner in the coming days.
Yes, I'm sure you will.
So, no, these look great. The counters look fantastic. The maps, of course, look great, as we have come to expect from Charlie and GMT, frankly. And it's a really nice little package. So I think I'm going to be telling people to come here from now on when they ask me what's the best entry point to GBACW rather than Death Valley. Although Death Valley's good too. But between the size of the battles here, and of course there's some small battles in Death Valley as well. But this is all small battles, plus that examples of playbook, which I think is going to help a lot of people figure out how to play this system that maybe had problems grokking one or more features. Personally, I found that I had to read just all the different ways that the different types of orders interacted
Yes.
multiple times before I got it, and I'm
Yes.
positive I screwed it up several times.
Right. And then, that's another really good example of how at first you struggle with it because it seems so alien that, depending on your orders, what you can and can't do just in terms of movement is different.
Mm-hmm.
You figure, okay, you got a movement allowance. You should be able to use that movement allowance anytime you move, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, it depends.
Right.
If you're under attack orders, it's halved.
Mm-hmm.
If you're under advance orders, it's what's printed.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, if you're under attack orders, even though your movement allowance is halved, you also have the option to also fire during the same activation, which
Mm-hmm.
you don't have under advance. In advance, you have to pick one.
Mm-hmm.
Do I fire, or do I move, or do I attempt to rally?
Mm-hmm.
If you're in attack orders, you can both move and fire if you choose to, or you could rally.
Mm-hmm.
So, it just takes some repetitions, and then after a while, it's like, okay, you just innately understand the difference between the two types of orders
Mm-hmm.
and the tactics involved, and then then it's not a problem to remember it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we found that even having been away from the series for a couple of years, when we picked up Stone's River last year, I found that it took me like an hour to just become reacquainted with the way everything worked.
Yeah,
I
kind of like
actually,
riding a bicycle.
yeah,
You
I
don't
mean,
forget.
it's not a light system, but once you've played it a bit, it's not hard to play, and it plays really well. It solitaires really well because of the chip pull mechanism,
Right.
and it keeps you guessing because of the unpredictability inherent in that chip pull mechanic, which
Yep.
helps to reflect some of the command and control difficulties that we saw in some of these battles. Right? You mentioned hey, we set this battle up all day and then we didn't attack until after dark. That is a thing that can just mechanically emerge from GBACW, and because you just didn't get it together in time, right?
That's right.
So,
And
and I
there are a lot of
appreciate
times when you can see, from your player's God's eye view, where you have perfect intelligence on your side and the enemy, and you can see opportunities from that vantage point.
Mhm.
But the game will change things for you because of the fact that with the chip pull mechanics and all those sort of things happening, you may see a big opportunity and not be able to take advantage of it because your guys are in the wrong orders, and then
Mhm.
when you try to change the orders, you fail.
Mhm.
Sometimes when you try to change the orders, not only do you not change the orders, you can't even move.
Right.
So
Or the
you're
loose
just
cannon
stuck.
rule too.
Oh yeah, the loose
Oh,
cannon
I've
is
had
one
that
of my
come up.
favorites.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Devil Dan Sickles
Oh
misbehaving
boy.
at Gettysburg. He didn't misbehave in the same way in our game as he did historically, but he did in fact misbehave in a very Sickles-like manner. All right,
Yep.
this looks like a fantastic new entry in the series. This is which how many have GMT done now? 1, 2, 3,
9.
5,
This
6,
is number
7,
9.
8, 9. So this is the 9th entry from GMT. And of course, the series as a whole kind of goes all the way back to the late 70s with the early original Berg designs from SPI, including Terrible Sword and P Ridge and Cedar Mountain and those. But this is a very much evolved game system compared to what we saw in those early SPI games.
Very much so.
So, all right, Alan, thanks so much for doing this. By Swords and Bayonets, it's finally out. I've been squealing about it. Why isn't it out yet? Why isn't it out yet for what feels like 2 years?
Not just
And
you.
I was about to say, you must have been itching much worse than I was as the designer.
Yes.
And this is your first published game design, am I right?
This is my maiden effort, and I'm really excited so far. Everything I've been hearing has been good,
Mhm.
and I didn't know what to expect, but so far so good.
So what's your next game design project?
Well, I'm still kind of like circling the wagon, so to speak, but I'm thinking if I do a next project, I'm going to kind of take after Greg Lawbuck, who's the designer of Death Valley, and go for one of his monumentally huge uh, under promise and over deliver things, and I might tackle the Peninsula campaign of 1862.
Ooh, I'm all over that.
Yeah.
Bring me
So
that. That's going to be a bit, though.
yeah. I've been spending the last couple of years probably just reading and rereading all of the really great books I've amassed on the campaign and the battles in that campaign,
Mhm.
and trying to get really familiar with them and get an idea of what I want to do. And now I'm kind of doing order of battle stuff like that, and going through all my dog-eared and notated books and building spreadsheets and doing all that order of battle
Mhm.
stuff. And then after that, then I'll figure out whether or not I can even attempt to put that on paper and cardboard, because it's a challenge. There are a
It's a
number
big
of
topic.
big topic, and there are a number of unique things during that particular campaign that are really going to either stop the thing from being produced at all, or are going to really make the difference as to why it would stand out from all of the others.
Mm. Well, I can't wait to see it. So get back to work.
All right.
So,
Well, in the
all right.
meantime, you got those 4 battles to keep you
Yep.
occupied.
Yep. And new battles to learn about. Of these 4, Big Bethel's really the only one I've done any reading on at all. So I look forward to reading, to learning more about these battles through play of the game. And it looks absolutely fantastic. I, for one, am delighted with what we got in this package from GMT. So, and again, Alan, thanks for being here with us this evening.
Sure.